call the meeting to order. And can you please take the roll, Ms. Cruz?
Representatives Baker.
Here.
Gray.
Here.
Hallinan.
Here.
Henderson.
Here.
Jennings.
Here.
Roscoe.
Excused?
Sweeney.
Here.
And Yin.
Excused.
Mr. Chairman.
Here.
We have 7 present to excuse, sir.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, well, members, and appreciate folks who are here today joining us. I think we have one online. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and we're honored to have the President of the Senate, former House member, now Senator. President of the Senate has a nice little constitutional amendment for us, so we appreciate you joining us, and the floor is yours, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Committee. Realize we're moving past the deadlines, but I still feel like this is something that needs discussion as we move into the coming years, Mr. Chairman and Committee, because we have a changing situation. Let me take you back to long about 06, 07. We saw something similar happening with our property taxes, just going beyond what a person could deal with, at least on the western side of the state. And there were multiple attempts by key people to bring property tax relief back then. Not allowed to show props, but if I were, I would say that there's a lot of bills out there that have been put together and attempted. And I appreciate the good Department of Revenue for helping me collect them all to see just what we attempted many years ago. It was back in your time and my time, Mr. Chairman. Speakers, presidents trying to address it, and everything failed. We had a self-correcting measure, folks, back then. It was the 08 recession. Everything just fell apart. And property tax was no longer a problem. And we went along for quite some time. The difficulty back then was, in 08, was just trying to take a small business through the recession. I had to completely rebuild my Main Street business and make it something that it wasn't before. Just being able to make a business survive. So we went along for quite a few years, and then along came COVID, and on the backside of COVID, some really strange things started to happen. People found Wyoming in a way that they've never found it before. And they're rolling in, and they're buying the entire bottom of a valley with a beautiful river in it and claiming it, buying mountainsides, buying canyons. Well, that's all fine and dandy and in the free market, but in places where many of us have lived for decades now, we're finding our property taxes escalating beyond measure. My assessor said I'm sending out notices that are 140% on average above, in some cases, and even more. So I thought, let's step back in and start to look at this again. And I looked at a variety of attempts before, thought, well, maybe it's just we got to step in and do this resolution on the Constitution first and then do some follow-up legislation in the sessions to come. And Mr. Chairman, folks, we started with a much bigger, thicker bill. And in counseling with those who know such things, they said, let's just narrow this right down to the basic bill that you have in front of you now. Senate Joint Resolution 2. And Mr. Chairman, we'll just proceed with it if that's okay with you. Amend the Wyoming Constitution to authorize a homeowner's property tax exemption for the elderly and the infirm, trying to narrow it down to those who are most affected by this rise. Needed a 2/3 support in both houses. Steps into the Constitution, creating a new Section 21, submitting to the electors of the state at the next general election for approval or rejection to make a change in the Constitution. Ratify the following. The provision in the Constitution that addresses residential property taxes may be exempt from taxation to preserve the home ownership, those who potentially could lose their place just because they have no longer the ability to pay the extreme expenses, the extreme prices that are out there, the extreme taxes. Focused in on the elderly and the infirm, and for the support of the poor. Legislation may provide for residential property to be exempt from taxation in whole or in part as determined for such purposes. And in the bottom part of that page, folks, we we put it back into the legislature's lap to kind of decide the adoption of this amendment to the Wyoming Constitution would provide the legislature to allow them to do property tax exemption as it determines necessary to preserve that ownership. This isn't across the board. We've had other pieces of legislation out there this session that tried to cap it, but we ran into problems there. What do you cap? Do you cap $10 million pieces of property and try to compare that to someone who has a $200,000 or $300,000 home? That wasn't working. So this allows us to take a broader approach and address those who would most be affected, elderly, infirm, the poor, and put it in the Constitution and start from there and then follow up with other pieces of legislation along the way. So that, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of a summary of where we got to where we are today. In a very strange time, never would have guessed on the backside of COVID that everything would just explode. It's happening to the west, but I'm starting to hear of other places. Spoke to a former legislator up in Lovell, and she said, yeah, downtown there, got a little old home selling for $300,000 or $400,000. So maybe it's kind of creeping across the state. To what extent, I don't know, but somewhere we got to get a start on this and get a handle on it. See what we can do to help those who have just simply been living in Wyoming, minding their business, living their life here, working basic jobs, sending their kids to school, and suddenly they're hit with these taxes that are beyond their ability to pay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, we appreciate your presentation of the bill. Members of the committee, any questions? Good President, Representative Jennings has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, appreciate you being here, and I too. I think I ran an acquisition study bill this year that didn't make it very far. I have two questions for you. One, could you give us a definition of the infirm?
Yeah, we looked that up. Basically, Mr. Chairman, sorry. That basically those who just are limited in their ability to pay. That's kind of a short summary. We used, Mr. Chairman, we used on purpose kind of broad terms that would address those who would be affected. We didn't want to get into say, well, this particular class of people, but just keep it rather broad. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but we kept our phrases, our terms somewhat broad.
Any other questions of the President?
Yeah, I'd follow up.
Go ahead, follow up.
So on page 2, Mr. President, the legislature may provide for residential property tax to be exempt. Under the Constitution, don't we already have that capability? And maybe we don't have that will to take it on? And back to the infirm, the Constitution gives us the picture of trying to help the poor. And so would you see this as a means-tested thing that we would do?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. President.
I don't know about means tested, but at the same time, if we can do it now, we haven't been doing it. And I wanted something in place that said we're going to start doing it. We're going to put it out in front of the people and make it a decision that they say it's time. Means tested. We're moving into new territory, Mr. Chairman. We're going to test some of this along the way.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? And I think, the support of the poor is in the Constitution, other sections of the Constitution, and that's really, aid where we can actually hand out checks or benefits, those kind of things for aid of the poor. That's in our Constitution from 1890. And it's interesting how this was brought into this. As I read that's how I read it as Representative Jennings is, you're not going to give aid to the billionaires. This is aid to the folks who are.
Mr. Chairman, we wanted to really make sure that was the case.
Yeah, and that's the way I read that on line 7.
Mr. Chairman, I know it's in there, but one more time to say this is who we're focused on.
Yeah.
These are folks just living here, minding their business, and things changed all around them.
Any other questions, President? We're going to open up public comment. I'd like executive branch agencies, if you want to comment, and so you know. Okay, anybody else? All right, we have a question before you leave, Mr. President. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, are all elderly going to be covered by this or just elderly that are
Mr. Chairman,
financially in
yeah.
tough shape.
Mr. Chairman, that's why we added the specific language to poor, because we have elderly, but we have a lot of elderly multimillionaires. So we were trying to define a little more carefully who we were assisting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Any other? Okay, open it up to public comment. Is there anybody here in the room would like to comment? Okay, go ahead and just come on up, and we have 3 seats here, so if anybody else, go ahead and just come on up and sit down, and we'll just work through it. Looks like you're the only one today from here. Okay, good morning.
Saving the best for last, huh? Thank you, committee. Thank you, Chairman Harshman. I'm Tom Laycock with AARP Wyoming. We just wanted to obviously voice our support for this bill. Thank President Dockstader. Before the session started, we actually had 4 different lawmakers that contacted us and said they had some interest in doing something around property tax relief this year. And so we very much appreciate that. This is clearly a thing, right? We know this will go a long way to helping people sort of, empower them for how they want to live and age in the state of Wyoming. So we very much support it. We're happy to help with the information dissemination on the backside in terms of process and what this looks like to our 83,000 members around the state, and be happy to help in any way we can.
Very good. Any questions? Mr. Laycock, go ahead. Representative Sweeney has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you track within your membership, in any sort of means testing as far as income? I'm not aware of it, but I just was curious, which may help on the on part of this.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, I'm not aware that we do. We've got a very difficult membership to get into. You have to be over 50 and give us $16 a year. Past that, we don't ask a lot of questions, but I can check around and see if we have anything a little deeper in that.
And then the property tax relief program was funded, first time since I think 17 or since we've been in kind of budget cuts. So that is good news for kind of the same population of the elderly and disabled that are means tested and administered by the Department of Revenue. It's a good program we've had for years. So I think regardless, I think all of us can help advertise that as well. So that'll be good. That'll do some good for folks who really need it. So, okay, but that's on the backside, after the tax bill has come. This is kind of on the front side for sure. Okay, any other questions? Thank you. Okay, appreciate you being here. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm all for helping
Can you
the
go ahead and
infirms.
just introduce yourself?
I'm sorry.
Who you
Yes,
represent?
of course. My name is Kathy Russell. I am a resident of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and a daughter of parents who are in that elderly and infirm group, and aunts and uncles and so on. I'm all in favor of helping our elderly on fixed incomes many times be able to stay in their own homes. They do better. They're health-wise and especially mentally and socially, they do much better. However, this bill looks like it needs work, and maybe I don't understand the intent of amendments, but the topic of may concerns me. Where does that get defined? And Representative Sweeney, I appreciated your comments, and I think somebody else brought this up too. What about the means testing? Who makes those decisions? Where is this going? I'm all in favor of it, but this does not look like it's ready for a ballot. And that's all I had.
Okay, any questions or follow-ups? You, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, are you speaking as a private citizen?
Yes, I am.
Not a representative of the?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other? I think, Ms. Russell, on line 7 of that, and we do this in the Constitution where whether it's like vacancies in office, all those things we've allowed the legislature then to pass laws. And I think that's really what this is setting up, is that, because right now we can't. Constitution, it's fair market value. Period. And this would then, as I understand it, Mr. President, and I'm getting the nod, yes, but this would allow then, just what it says, the legislature may provide for residential, and then we'd go through that whole debate and set up the program, how we'd want it. So that's, you wouldn't put something that specific in the Constitution generally. Yeah. So like our original Constitution, for example, we, just vacancies in office. It said that any vacancies in office shall be filled by special election for the legislature. And that was changed in 1948 or as provided by the legislature. And then we've changed the law and those kind of things. So I think this is good. I just want to kind of just point out, I think it's the proper language would move it then to us as lawmakers. So that's my 2 cents on that, but thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate that
Yeah.
explanation. And Mr. Dockstader, President Dockstader, I appreciate you bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, very good. Any other folks here that would like to testify? Okay, do we have one online? Can we go ahead and bring,
We do, Mr. Chairman. We have Mr. Divis online.
good morning. Can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Better?
There, we got you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dave Davis, representing the Sweetwater County Assessor, the Wyoming County Assessors Association and the Sweetwater County Assessor. The Assessors Association is in favor of this. We take polls on legislation as they come through, and very rarely do we all agree, but we all agreed on this one. This is something that we do think is necessary. We did have some issues with the mechanics of it as it was originally written. We wondered how it would be administered, but I think the changes that have been put into this by the President Dockstader have actually helped this bill. Because the exemption is probably going to be applied through our offices, we would like to help craft the legislation, make sure it's is done as simple and easy as possible, not only for us, but for the taxpayers themselves. So all in favor of this. I think it's the right idea. I think the intent is correct, and the assessors across the state just want to help. And I do want to commend both the House and the Senate for funding the property tax refund program. I do think that's something that helps people today. All of the other bills that were presented regarding property taxes in this session seem to be a couple of years away from helping anybody. And that property tax refund program helped people today. And I really do appreciate that. And I know the taxpayers do as well. I would stand for any questions. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Appreciate you joining us. Any questions this morning? Okay, well, again, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Okay, anyone, do you have a question? Okay, okay, any other folks here would like to testify? I think we have a question, Mr. President. Can you come back up as we work the bill? We're going to close public comment and ask the President to join us as we work this bill. And I think Representative Jennings has a question for you, Mr. President.
I do, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so I don't know if the President is the exact person to ask this to, but I think it's a good place to start. So I see that we're putting this to residential, and I understand that that's the goal. But I was thinking about, because in our amendment that we're going to work, and so this might not be the right time, but I'd like him to be thinking about it. It seems like there could be some kind of crossover equation there towards the taxation. Take somebody that's owns some property, let's say ag, and they're trying to just keep up on their taxes and stuff like that. Their residential is different. And so I have a little bit of question as to narrowing the scope of this strictly to residential, because you could have a mom and pop operation and they live above their store or something of that nature. They might not fall into this particular category of, maybe it's commercial, but maybe the same thing on a rancher or something like that. They've pared it down to a small. Have you given thought to, does narrowing the scope to this of residential, does it harm some people? I mean, have you thought, is there another way to do that in the means testing? I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, not a lot of thought on that because it was just, we wanted to focus on where people are living, their residential properties that they'd called home for a long time. And the more defining measures would come in follow-up legislation, and that may be the place to address what you need to have addressed there. And I can see your point too. Thank you.
Any other questions, President? Members, what's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
It's been moved by Representative Henderson, seconded by Representative Jennings. Members, I distributed, and Mr. President, we have an extra copy, but this was brought to me by staff that there were a couple little cleanup, just adding a few words, and
Sure.
that amendment is here. So is there, you all have a copy of the amendment? I think, Ms. Cruz, can you give the president extra copy? I gave the extra right there, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any motion on the amendment? Moved by Representative Hallinan, seconded by Representative Baker. And then the amendment, basically, it's all on page 2, members. And so on line 4, it should say Constitution instead of article at the end of line 4. And then on line 6, after elderly and for the should be inserted, for the infirm. And then line 16, insert on the ballot language residential property, because that's what the constitutional amendment is about, is residential, and the word residential was left out on line 16. I want to make that clear to the voters when they read that. And then one more time, for the infirm on line 18. So that's the amendment brought to us by our staff.
So,
Any questions? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Representative Jennings.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think this might be the proper place because I'd be supportive of all of those, but I think it might behoove us to think a little bit more about that question of residential here. Because we're wanting to means test is the real issue. And I just don't want to capture, the person that lives in their home is above their business, or, and I don't know how we word that. I don't know if but I'd like to have us discuss that just a little bit more. Yeah. Say a farm or ranch family, and we're not talking about somebody that's got 10,000 acres, but they've narrowed that back and narrowed it back, and now they're just trying to stay on their property. They're trying to stay in their home, and I have a little bit of heartburn narrowing it down and perhaps
I
giving
think,
some.
and I'm looking at the director, I'm going to have her come up, but really that ranch property, that house would be assessed residential, would come under this, but not the ag land itself. But maybe you can add to that. Director, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of thoughts.
Director Henson.
Yes, Director Brenda Henson. Nice to see you all this
Just want to
morning.
make sure people on the Zoom know.
Based on the discussion that we've heard, this is a really short chair. Based on the discussion we've heard, perhaps we could even identify it instead of saying residential property. We could say primary residence, because you could have a primary residence on an agricultural property, you could have it on a commercial property. Generally, an assessor, when they're identifying property, obviously it has to fall in one of the tiers. It's industrial, commercial, residential, or agricultural. However, even though that's the primary use of the overall property, I think you could have that residence perhaps in this bill. Primary residence. It may also help in assisting to ensure these are not second homes. It's their primary residence.
That's the part I think you bring up, a very good point. Person owns 3 or 4 homes. And I think where you could put that word primary, maybe it's line 17, after preserve primary home ownership. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. I'm just spitballing this committee, but
Good idea.
for,
Right there before home.
yeah, and I'm looking up in the constitutional lines 4 through 10. That'd be a second amendment. We can work on that here in a minute, but how about this amendment we've got on the table? Can we dispatch with that? Question being called. All those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Now back to this idea of kind of primary. You could, I think it fits members on line 17. Is there a spot up here in the Constitution where it fits?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Bonnie, did you get that on line 17, right after preserve? The word primary. But folks, I think it needs to go in the Constitution then up here if that's, so I'm just reading this.
Line 8, Mr. Chairman, maybe?
Line 8, what do you have there, right, for primary resident?
Primary residential property.
Is that the way, is that what you think? Representative Baker, primary residential property, moved by Representative Baker, is that a motion then? Primary, and seconded by Representative Henderson. So Bonnie, that's right on line 8 after 4. Provide for primary residential property.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Gray.
I think we need to put it on line 5 too. Start on line 5.
Okay, that's an amendment to the amendment. Or is that friendly?
Yes.
That's friendly. Representative Baker? Okay. Does that work for you, Mr. President? I think that's working.
Yes, it is.
Director? Okay, so we got primary in 2 spots. That's a friendly, so we'll roll this into that amendment. So at the beginning of line 5, primary residential property. And then line 8, after 4, primary residential property. Okay? Discussion? Go
Thank you,
ahead,
Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
So what about on page 1? Is there anything necessarily?
Let's take a look and see if we have to conform that. You know, I think the title is probably okay.
Okay.
You know, the parts you're gonna see is section 1 and section 2 is gonna be on the ballot. Mr. President, you have any thoughts on that? Do anything with the title? Put primary in there?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think we're comfortable with the title, but
Okay,
we'll follow the commissioner's direction.
Question?
okay, question being called on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Are there other amendments to the? Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Okay. No further amendments?
Question.
Question being called. Please take roll on Senate Joint Resolution number 2.
Representatives Baker.
Aye.
Gray.
Aye.
Hallinan.
Aye.
Henderson.
Aye.
Jennings.
Aye.
Roscoe excused. Sweeney.
Aye.
Representative Yin left an aye vote, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 ayes, 1 excused.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate you
Thank you, Mr.
bringing this, and
Chairman
we'll
and
just
committee.
all teamwork this thing. We can get it on committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any other further business? You should have got a calendar invite for Thursday at 1 PM. Room 5 will be in us next door. Okay. Okay, very good.
Thursday at 1?
I think, yeah, and it came across as a calendar invite. If you want to click on it, it'll go to your, very good. Well, thank you for getting that set up. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us, and we're going to adjourn the meeting.